Okay, guys, so I just wanted to run through a couple of ways of thinking of using the Elementor global fonts and typography. It is a little buggy in the editor, but once you get it set, it works well. Just a couple of little quirks in getting it to work in the first place, which we'll talk about. But what I want to do is just put out there a couple of ideas, because there's a way that I've been working, and there's another way that I've been hearing people talk about as an option, and I want to run through the two different ideas and see what people think is a better way of working. So I've got a test page worked out here. I've just got two fonts at the top here, which is what I'm calling a bold hero font and a normal hero font, and they're obviously very large. I'm using the bold hero font to separate my sections here. I've got 4 heading widgets, just the standard Elementor heading widget, from an H1 through to an H2, an H3, H4. Then I've got an H4 where I've set the typography to accent. So that's the first set of headings and accent. Then I've got a text editor here, where it's just a standard text editor with H1, H2, H3, H4, and some body copy. So here's my test page. Now, I've started with the new way of thinking that I'm looking at because it's a bit more involved. And what I'm going to show you is in the site settings, we go into the global fonts. So we've got our standard primary, secondary, text, and accent. I always create a bold hero font and a normal hero font so I can get some nice big fonts that I can use in calls to action, heroes, or whatever. And I'm only showing the desktop sizes here. I'm not going to go into the breakpoints and font sizing. That's just really the concept of this. And then I've also created an H1 through to an H4, and I'm going to show you those now. So typically what I do with my primary, I set that to the same font family that I use for my body copy, but I make it a little bit bolder or a little bit bigger or transform it or whatever it is. And I use that for things like these navs in the header up here. That's pretty typically where I would use the primary font. It might actually be also in buttons, so you get a nice bold text inside the button depending on your design. Secondary is a normal or 400, which is the same thing, weight font, and I use that for all of the headings. In most cases, again, this is just a baseline. You might find some designs where you mix that up. You might have a mix of your primary and secondary for your headings. Text, again, it's the same as my primary, but it's just the normal font weight. And accent is the same as my secondary in this case, but I set it to a little bit bolder, uppercase, set the line height to 1.25 and add a little bit of letter spacing in there. So that's this accent over here. So if you watch this accent font here, if I move that slider, that moves back there. So that's pretty much the main ones. The big hero fonts, again, it's my secondary, which is the Montserrat, which is with large sizes. In that case, it's 900 weight, and my normal. Same font, but it is the normal weight. So that's those settings there. So what I've done here is in the heading one, I make that my secondary, nice big size, nice and bold, line height of 1.2 to start with. H2, same, everything's exactly the same, slightly less bold, and slightly smaller size. H3, it's normal weight, smaller size, that's 2 rem. And my H4 is slightly bold and only slightly bigger, so 1.4 rem than the body font. What I then do is in my global fonts, in my typography, I'm not sure why that keeps going to the pencil, I would set that the typography for the body, I'll set that to text. So that's my Poppins down there. I'm not doing anything with the link just yet. Might change the colors of the headings. I'll just set the heading of the heading 1 to black. And then in here, all I'm selecting is the H1, H2, H3, H4, etc. Actually, I don't think I did the H4. Yes, I did. H1, H2, H3, H4 from my global fonts. So that's these. So if I want to vary these, let's say, and this is where one of the bugs in the editor is. If I make that font there maybe a little bit smaller, it actually works this time. Last time I did this, it didn't work. So sometimes the editor, when you change these, they just don't work. You just change your setting, update it, refresh the page, and then they work anyway. So I can do all of my changes from my global fonts for all of the standard settings. So the weight, transforms, style, line height, letter spacing, word spacing, all that sort of stuff. I can do all from this one panel. So there's the benefit in doing that. Now, what I'm going to do is show you the way that I have been doing it, which is to not use these. So I'm just going to delete those. Before I do that, I should have mentioned the benefit of doing it this way is I'm just going to leave the H2 one there. Back to the editor. Is I can select anything. Say, for example, I've got an H4 tag here, but if I select the H2 typography, I'm going to get all the H2 typography sizing, so I can use the DOM elements that I want for proper SEO, but select the sizing and the styles of the different headings based on what I actually want to display. Now, whether that makes it more confusing or less confusing is really the question that I'm asking, is like, are we better off to these global fonts, so to not have these? There's another bug I'm just going to show you. If I go back now into my site settings and have a look at my typography, I'll see that there's a lot of stuff missing. Actually, it's not this time. When you add things, they often go missing when you do this. So the general way that I used to work was to create just those basic primary, secondary, text and accent, a big hero and a normal hero. And then in the typography, for my headings, heading 1, I would set it to secondary and then set my sizes here. So in there, I'd set that to say 3 REM with a 800 or 900 weight. So I'd set it there. And then for my H2, again, secondary, let's make that a 2.5 REM. I've got to set the letter line height, say, 1.3. So you get the point. So I'd set them here. Now, just realizing the downside of doing it this way, and this is my old way of doing it, is that now I can't use these to change the size of other elements. So if I go back to my editor, and I go to this one here, I don't get the option to change that to a different preset for the heading 1, heading 2, heading 3, heading 4, because I don't have those defined. So I'd have to actually break from the global and change the settings here. So I'm kind of starting to think that a better method is to just define my fonts here. So going into my global fonts, adding an H2, for example, let's add the H2 and set that to Montserrat. REM of 2.5. Let's make the bold of, say, 500 and line height of 1.3. Yeah, I'll show you what I mean by these typography being broken. If I go back in there and I try to change my H2 they're all gone. So when you add a font, this just disappears. So you have to do an F5. Go back to your site settings, typography, and now we can select the H2 that I created. So now that's my H2 there. So my H2 is now based on this global font that I created the H2. If I go into here now, and this is probably not going to work because this is one of the bugs I think happens. If I move that, see it's not changing. So if I made that a 3.1 update, back to the editor, watch the H2, Control F5, and now it's big. So there's quite a few things with the global fonts and typography that get quite messed up, and the way to fix it is to basically save your settings, do an F5. Now when I go in here, if I change that setting, it will change. So even though it wasn't changing before, it now will change. So by doing it here, I can change all of my primary, secondary text accent, my hero fonts, H1 through to H4 or whatever you use, save it there. And then it's much easier to manage. Now if I go to this H4, for example, and I say I want that to be the style of the H2, I can select that from here and it'll make my H4 nice and big. So whether that's a good way of doing it or not, I don't know. I'm just going to give one more example, actually. Sorry, I'm tending to go off track a little bit here, but I'm going to give you an example of what I've seen a lot, where heading ones are used as accent fonts. So let's say, in fact, we don't need to create a new font. Say we want a heading 1. For our SEO, we want a heading 1. But for our design, we want that to look like our accent. So even though that's still a heading 1 element, we've told it to look like our accent. So we've got it with this, spaced out, all caps header, but it's still, as far as SEO goes, it's still an H1. And that's not going to mess up any H1s that we used in our text editor down here. So it's really just for display, for styling, without messing up your SEO order of SEO of heading tags. So I'm really, as I'm working through, so I'm leaning towards it being a better way to actually create all of your global fonts here. So H1 through to whatever H you use. I only go to H4 generally. Go into your typography and just use the classes that you created, or the globals that you created in your global fonts, and do all of your changes, apart from colors because you can't change it in there. All of your changes for your fonts, do it from your global fonts, not from your typography. So yeah, that's kind of the way I'm leaning. I'd love to hear some ideas or feedback as to what you think as to what the better way is to go. But yeah, let me know what you think.